Kabirinat Am kasagvenu Tarenu Nora Anabukoa Gulajeminka Tisatrua Kabirinat Am kasagvenu Tarenu Nora Nagibu Doshi Hurika Kavava Shomri Barakin Tarim Rakami sits the taker Tamik Kamlen Hassan Kadosh Hassan Kadosh Barov Tuvka Nahil Adi Taker Yehid Kehi Leah make a pay So Kore Kadosh Taker Shabbatenu Kabil Ushma Sazakatenu Yodea Talmud La 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 Baruch Shem Kivod Malutone Olam Vae Baruch Shem Kivod Malutone Olam Vae Baruch Shem Kivod Malutone Olam Vae Leolam Vae Please, Father, with strength redeem Yisrael. Baruch Hashem. It's a great joy to have this opportunity to share with you again what Hashem is sharing with me. He has introduced me to this prayer that I sang for you called Ana Bakoa. Please Google it. A-N-A. Ana, please. B. K-O-A-C-H. Ana Bakoa. Please, with power, redeem Israel. See, so we are in the redemptive cycle. We're being elevated up from the dark corridors of ignorance and bondage and idolatry to a knowledge of the one supreme God of Israel and the God of the whole world. It's just not Israel's God and then you got your God and then we got my God and this. Yes, those are social deities, conceptions. But I'm talking about the source of reality, the source of everything that exists, the source of existence, the cause of existence, and that which maintains existence. And that's what we are. So waking up now, we want to have a deeper understanding of our potential, because that's the glory of our incarnation. We've had an experience, a short period of time. 400 years is a short period of time in which to grasp a fundamental truth. There can be no joy and fulfillment without the knowledge of God. There can be nothing. We see that on two sides. From my side as having been disenfranchised as a poor servant of a system designed to make me serve it in any way and not optimize my potential through the system so that I can actualize my potential and be completely joyful. There are barriers that militate against that. That's beautiful for me because that forces me to understand that there's no fulfillment in the relative. I understood that long time ago, even as I pursued my profession. I did not look for fulfillment in the relative, and that turned me toward the deeper aspects of life, the eternal, non-changing aspects of life. When I was 24, I began to have an encounter with my higher, transcendental, immortal self, and was given a means by which I could dive into my inner being and saturate my subjective mind with a quality of intelligence that was absolute, a quality of intelligence that was omniscient, a quality of intelligence that was blissful, a quality of intelligence that was joyful, a quality of intelligence that has a revivifying effect on the physiology. So that sensitized me to spirituality, my own spirituality. My own transcendental reality had nothing to do about going outside of myself or going to a building and listening to a lecture about somebody who came and what they did. My quest became, who am I? And how can I actualize the same potential that other men who we laud as gods even actualize their potential? Because the reality is that no man is the God in the fullness of that word, what is meant by that, because all human flesh is relative. We come for a short period of time to actualize that potential. So I would like to share with you today an article that I wrote, which reflects my understanding of the nature of life. And this is Baba Yahshua talking to my Israelite brothers and sisters who maybe have not had the time or the opportunity, nor was it their incarnation objective to ponder these deep philosophical and spiritual questions that were given to me in my 20s so that I could contemplate them for 50 years and go across the world to Australia and to Ethiopia and to Yisrael and throughout the Caribbean and to the Ukraine and through the world, up to the top of the world, searching and looking and interacting with different technologies to awaken that full potential that really is the human potential. So this article is entitled From Individual Life to Cosmic Consciousness, which I say is the human potential. What is my potential, which I now have activated and cultivated through my odyssey of searching and engaging my technologies, different technology, and my specific technology of consciousness that allows me to dive into the infinite pool of creativity and transform my neurophysiology so that I can revivify myself and have this opportunity to be a Baba and share with you and ask you to consider such words and make some observations of things. So, from Individual Life, and this is from the reportermonthly.com. You can find this article, The Human Potential, Dr. Yisrael, From Individual Life to Cosmic Consciousness, the Human Potential. Now, the experience of the physical world is really made possible because our senses. Well, let me start here. The relative world, the total range of life. Let's just, what is life encompass? What is life? What is the scope of life? Then we answer that the total range of life encompasses two discrete fields. You can, and these fields can be described in terms of 5 levels of soul awareness of these fields as we make our progression from being ignorant of the total reality of life through engaging the odyssey of life and to engage a technology of consciousness that awakens us to our full potential. What is the human potential? And the human potential is unity consciousness with the ultimate reality. But we know, the total range of life encompasses now 2 fields. So one is relative. I want to use the word relative, and the other is absolute. Now, to contrast these fields, the relative world is the world of our senses. The experiences of the physical world are made, or the relative world are made possible because of our five senses. That is our ability to see and to touch, to smell, and to taste and to hear. Now these senses, every sense has its own limitation with respect to the total scope of frequencies available. Because of our physiological design, we have certain limitations. For example, the auditory mechanism of the human hearing range, frequencies ranges from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. And that's a very short range with respect to subatomic sounds, subaudible sound. Beyond that range, below, let's say 1500 hertz, 10 hertz signal we couldn't hear, or a signal above 40,000 hertz, 50,000 hertz. We can't, that's just not in our audible frequency range by virtue of design of the limited capacity of the cochlea. And so we have another capacity to grasp reality. So my point is, we are physically limited to grasp the total scope of the physical world. Now, the substance of the physical world, the relative world, is based on and structured and arises from the absolute world. The absolute world, we can use words like the spiritual world, the unseen world, the unmanifest world, the non-changing world, to contrast with the physical, observable, changing world. Ever since we've been born, we have been changing. We were born a little baby, infant, then we became a baby, and we grew up to be a boy and a girl and a young adult and middle-aged man and an old senior man, and we began our demise, and we died. So the nature of relative life is conception, then evolution, maintenance, and dissolution. We are born, we thrive, we evolve, and we reach manhood or womanhood, and we feel indomitable. We feel like we're never going to get old and we can do anything. And then we stay in that, we maintain that posture for a period of time, and then we begin to slowly evolve. Well, the human capacity, that has been the norm and the definition of human life and ignorance. That is that side of life that is only living 50% of the total, because the total consists of two aspects, relative and absolute. The relative world is our senses of the world of space and time and science and mathematics and chemistry. The world is characterized by continuous change, as opposed to, as we said, the non-changing absolute field. Moreover, this absolute field now, the absolute non-changing spiritual, or as studied now by the sciences, it is called the unified field theory in quantum physics. You can Google it and read it, and this is that unmanifest which science now has discovered, because science is now beginning to discover itself from a conscious perspective and to understand consciousness, which is spirituality, as being the source of everything, which is what the sacred writings of all of the scriptures have said from the outset. So science is now catching up, and the goal of science and the beauty of science, that it validates, it has a criterion for reaching a conclusion. So the purpose of this article now, it's essential that the words religion and spirituality be defined and differentiated, because they're often used interchangeably. And in this article, they are mutually, they are not mutually exclusive. They are mutually exclusive, I'm sorry. They mean completely different things. I'll use them not in the same context. So the word religion refers to a belief in a controlling power, autonomous power with a name, and has anger and the same human emotions, which some ascribe as supremely important. Spirituality, on the other hand, is the quality of being concerned with the human spirit, with the human soul. Spirituality is structured within consciousness. Consciousness is the awareness, of the intelligence that structures evolution and is at the source of our creation. So that's spirituality, which is and it's structured in consciousness on the plane. But religion pertains to belief system, theological dictates, theological conclusions that are handed down to the laity to act upon and to believe without question. Now, I have, in my 50 years of studying and living in India and traveling through Jerusalem and going to holy places in Bali and other places, Nepal, we've developed, by virtue of our being highly trained in this technique, this science. It's a science. And we call what we have created self-reflection. The self as to be differentiated by the body, and the body being an expression of the relative, whereas the self be an expression of the eternal, non-changing, absolute, immortal aspect of ourself. And this knowledge of ourself is dependent upon the level of the soul, because there are 5 levels of soul. So depending upon the maturity of the soul, then that soul becomes increasingly aware of the transcendental immortal one in respect to a communion with. Whereas at the lowest level of the soul level of intelligence, nefesh, there could only be speculative knowledge and theological knowledge. So this self-reflection technique that Baba Yeshua has created is based upon the Vedic tradition and mantras from that tradition. And it's a mental, spiritual discipline that systematically initiates what we call vertical thinking. Vertical thinking, which takes the mind into the transcendental field. Now, if we think about it, we say that the human brain or the mind, we only use about 10% of the total capacity. And that means 90% of the brain's capacity and thought capacity remains unused for all intents and purposes. Well, the goal of self-reflection is to increase our mental capacity by activating this and using and engaging subconscious capacity. That 90% that usually isn't available to us for some reason. Well, we now, by virtue of the Vedic tradition of masters, have technologies that allow us to access the deeper, to experience the more subtle. I want to say subtle because if we go from the grossest level of thought, thinking, that's where thought is appreciated. Ordinarily, thought is not appreciated at its inception. We simply have no appreciation for the processes involved in thought. We simply are aware of ourselves thinking about something. We say, oh, I'm thinking about mama. And the next thing we know, oh, I'm thinking about what my daughter's doing and what I'm going to. And these thoughts just come. Thousands of them all day, and they come. So let me define for you what is a thought. So we have this thing that's happening all place, and I'm saying it's superficial thinking. Longitudinal thinking involves just picking up the thought at its most grossest level and not appreciating it at any other level other than its gross expression. You find yourself thinking about it, and that type of thinking, longitudinal thinking, that is the appreciation, thought after thought after thought after thought, for all day long, 24 hours of this thinking, thinking, ceaselessly thinking. You can't stop thinking. There's never a time when you're not thinking. You're thinking about everything. You're thinking about your job. You're thinking about your children. You're thinking about you're going to die. You're thinking that you could find your loved ones. You wish you had more money. You wish you had more health. All day long, this thinking is going on. So we said, okay, so what's going on here? And we're saying with this type of thinking, we only are using about 10% of the capacity of the brain. So the Vedic masters now have given us technology by which we can engage what we're calling vertical thinking as opposed to this longitudinal thinking. Vertical thinking to dive deeper and deeper into the subtle, more profound aspects of the thought processes and the thinking capacity. Keep experiencing that. The experience of that is two things. It's charming. It feels good. It feels good to take the mind into the deeper regions of its own self, because ordinarily the thinking is about an object and the self is not experienced. The thought is all determined by the senses, because we said at the outset of this lecture that the senses, the five senses, are there in the relative world, and they are there to attach the self to the outer world, to perceive the outer world. We perceive the outer world through the auditory mechanism. We perceive the outer world through the visual mechanism, through taste and smell and touch. And so therefore the mind begins to identify only with this part of the total reality. The total reality that is seen, touched, smelled, felt, and that name that someone has given you. Hello, Frank. Yes, I am Frank. And you know, Frank, you are a Methodist. Yes, and you're an African American. So here comes intelligence into existence, and immediately it is identified and shaped and formed and identified with 50% of the total reality, that is the relative world, and remains ignorant of the deeper and more profound aspects of the world. And in the relative world, we have religion, where you go to listen and talk and hear someone talk about someone who was the personification of this unmanifest spiritual world, who had these gifts and powers, and we celebrate this individual or that individual while at the same time remaining impoverished and ignorant. So now in this particular time, at the threshold, we've just crossed the threshold of redemption. African Israelite people, where we were chained and bound in the religion for 400 years, and we were given a book, and we all were identifying with the book and fighting about the book. Someone said this was the right one. Someone said this was the wrong one. Said, no, this is the new one. This is the old one. And we fought each other about it, and it divided our families. And someone said, no, I'm a Hebrew Israelite, and I'm a Hebrew Israelite. Someone said, no, and we had all of this division based upon identification with the relative. And so now here we are at the threshold of crossing redemption threshold. Redemption has come. The chains of slavery have fallen away. The conquering lion of the tribe of Yehuda has come, has manifested his glory throughout the diaspora. And the natural mystic is moving now to set the captives even free by saying, don't enslave yourself. Don't enslave yourself anymore to religion. No type of religion. No type of religion, because you ought to be self-governed, and I want to use Jeremiah 31:33 for that. No longer will you need a teacher on that side, because you're going to be given by Hashem a technology by which you can dive inside of yourself and experience the kingdom of heaven, which is within. So in this article that I wrote, I'm talking about this self-reflection, a mental technique that takes our mind and initiates a vertical thinking, and the mind transcends the subjective, relative field and experiences the absolute field. Now, what is worship? Worship is an action that allows the mind to enter subtler levels of the creation. And the goal of worship is to become united with the object of worship, to be united to know the object of worship. And when you know equals union. And whatever the object of worship is, ultimately you have to become that by virtue of knowing it and be one with it. So in self-reflection, I'll use the word meditation. I'll use the word meditation and contrast it with what you call it, when your mind is just fixated on something, contemplation. Because contemplation fixed the mind. Well, meditation is a gentle stream of attention toward a pulsating, meaningless impulse. That's what a mantra is. It doesn't have meaning, but a lively impulse that allows the mind to take its natural course. And when the mind takes its natural course, quite naturally, it engages, it dives into its own nature, which is we call vertical thinking. So we have this technique by which we can self-reflect, superimpose upon our relative thinking, our thought, the thought process at this most superficial level, the gross level of thinking, and then by virtue of dynamics of this mantra, the dynamics and mechanics of this mind tool, that's what a mantra is, a mind tool, then the natural mechanics of the thinking process inverts and turned inward towards its nature and begins to experience subtler levels of the thought process. Now, and as this is repeated, rather than now thinking from using only 10%, maybe after meditating for a while, begin to use 20% of the thought process. And how does this what is this experience? The thought process is that people's strengths and their accomplishment are proportional to their level of thought. A man who thought of how to create this telephone that I'm having in my hand is a millionaire. The quality of that thought was just profound. He understood that if this and the whole thing was given to him really by the infinite source of creative intelligence, that is the source of thought. Now I'm going to back up a little bit and I want to define thought for you because I keep using the word thought. What is a thought? Let me ask you, define thought. What is thought? Now let me define it as I've reflected upon it. A thought is an impulse of energy and intelligence. It's energy because it moves from the unmanifest to manifest, from some level of inception up to your level of awareness and your ability to perceive the level of thought. So ordinarily, you aren't aware of the thinking process, so you just pick up the thought when it's fully manifest. And a thought has intelligence, so we have its energy and its intelligence. Why intelligence? Because a thought has specificity. A thought is about something. You say, I want to get a yellow rose. I want to get a yellow rose with a green stem that has several thorns. A very specific thought. So we can deduce from this now. So a thought is an impulse of energy and intelligence. We can also further deduce that since this thinking process goes on throughout the day and throughout our lives effortlessly, then the source of thought must be an infinite source of energy and intelligence. So that's plausible to me, that we can deduce that this thinking that we do arises from an infinite source of energy and intelligence. Energy and intelligence, and the type of intelligence is it's incomprehensible. So, self-reflection is a technique by which we can take the mind from the gross level into the subtle levels to experience its own nature, and that is charming. That is to experience deeper levels of the self. That's worship. I remember when I was a kid and we would go and worship, and I would see some ladies who was sanctified transcend. They would be so in the spirit worshiping, and they would go out. Boom. They would transcend. And people would come and then they would describe the experience as just being blissful, as entering into heaven. So worship is that act. So we know how to transcend, that is, experience subtler degrees of our own subconscious. And it's refreshing. It's charming to the mind and refreshing to the nervous system, because we have this mind-body relationship. Whatever state of mind you're in, there's a corresponding physiological state that the body. So when you do self-reflection, you engage vertical thinking, superimpose your mantra, and the natural tendency of the mind moves toward subtler levels of itself, which is refreshing to the body. It releases stress. Give the body a deep rest while the mind remains active and alert. And as you do this daily, morning and evening meditation. Everybody knows morning and evening meditation. You began to experience an inner silence that grows, because the deeper aspects of ourself, the more powerful levels of energy and being, are quiet and profound. And the goal of this self-reflection, this is self-reflection, just reflecting on the self, that 90% of yourself that you are unfamiliar with on your mental level, because you've only been using 10% of that capacity. And you're not going to build nothing, no pyramids or nothing with that. You're not going to do anything. That's just 10% perfunctory thinking about little bitty things, not having great thoughts. And that's why we're in the condition that we have been in. We were engaged in religion, believing someone else's story, not having a skill to empower ourselves by activating at first, activating and then cultivating that potential. And what is that potential? And that potential is infinite intelligence. That potential has to do with 7 states of consciousness. That potential has to do with optimizing what you have as a melanic man and woman, a potential to be unified with the Godhead. So worship is an action that allows the mind to enter the subtle levels of creation, and the goal of worship is to become united with the object of worship, and with repeated experiences of the absolute field of consciousness. When the mind keeps going subtler levels and then comes back, subtle levels come back. So meditation is experience of inward stroke of meditation, outward stroke of meditation, digging down in the absolute, coming back to the relative. The absolute, relative, absolute, relative. And each time that the mind comes back to the relative, what you're doing is you're increasing the capacity of the subconscious mind, and your thinking becomes more profound. And you're giving the physiology a deep, deep rest, and you're releasing stresses that ordinarily remain deep in the crevices of the neurophysiology. But this meditation with these mantras, these Vedic sounds that were cognized by seers, has this neurophysiological effect. And so the goal of worship, the goal of meditation now is ultimately to experience the most subtle level of the thought process, the most subtle level of the process. And then transcend that, to go beyond any relative aspect of being, to experience pure being. Pure being is pure consciousness. pure consciousness. So with long-term meditation, remember, we're going to cultivate from only using 10% with meditation, cultivating that unused part of the mental capacity and getting it all, and then transcending even that now becomes. So what happens is that over a long-term period of self-reflection, the silence and deep inner silence and bliss that is felt in meditation begins to spill over into activity. And in activity, even during the dynamism of activity, there remains in one's sense of being a deep sense of silence. And you can begin to notice this early on, and what happens with the self-reflection technique that I teach, the silence grows. If with regular meditation, each time you take your mind into that deep inner silence, that deep intelligence, when the mind comes out of that field, it is vibrant. The neurophysiology is revivified. You're fresh. The windows of perception are clear. Thinking is clear. Intelligence immediately begins to increase. And your accomplishments begin to increase. And as your accomplishments begin to increase, your fulfillment and contentment increase. As your fulfillment and contentment increase, you become very, very likable guy, very happy, wonderful lady, so happy. Why? And this is what we need. But when you are ignorant of the self and you can't actualize anything, and you don't have a tool. See, this is a technology of consciousness, a tool by which you can go in and experience the self and stop identifying with the relative, because everything in the relative is in a state of change. And it's also incomplete knowledge. Total knowledge means total awareness. There's also a house, but there is a foundation. And the source of the house is the foundation. But we Black Americans have been living in the house, celebrating the color of the house, trying to give an argument that that's what makes us something, that we have something called melanin. Well, what we have is consciousness. And consciousness is the basis of the house. And what we have not had is a technology of consciousness by which we may go into our inner sanctum in the house to experience the infinite source of creativity and spirituality that makes us an African or a human or whatever you are, because this is the source of everything. And this, when we begin to experience the level of the self, then all of the dichotomies and the relative breakdown, then you can surely say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one, that is the one of the whole creation." And we begin to see and appreciate intelligence and to understand theology as being different from reality. Because theology, even though people talk that, they don't even move from their camps. Religion creates artificial dichotomies which ignorant people do not understand, and they defend those boundaries as though they were actual, and they are temporal boundaries, and they are relative boundaries structured in time for the purposes that the Creator intended them. And this is the purpose of race and diversity. And that's why diversity must be celebrated and appreciated. So with this continued process of in and out of the self, in and out of the self, the quietness of the inner self begins to spill over into activity, and one begins to sense a sort of dual awareness awareness of all the activity that's going on here in the outside of the world and outside, but on the inside there's a sense of inactivity and quietness and stillness and profound depth, where it seems to be intelligence bubbling up by itself, giving you the answer, giving you the direction, doing what needs to be done. So this now is called, with respect to the human potential, this is now called cosmic consciousness. So what we've done here, we have introduced to you, Hebrew Israelites, a technology of consciousness by which we in the 21st century must engage and study. I'll ask you to study. I've been studying this for 50 years and have a technology of consciousness that we use. And we're very, very at peace with the results because we see the supreme mental intelligence and also the physiological results that come from living in the kingdom of heaven here, that the kingdom of heaven is within. So the growth and ascendancy to cosmic consciousness fulfills the purpose of individual life in the relative field. So we are born into the relative field, boys and girls, men and women, whoever we are, these relative beings with relative identities and relative genders and everything. And we identify at an early age with the most superficial and obvious aspects of ourselves and those that were inculcated by our parents. You're Jewish or you're African or you are whatever you are, and we identify with that. But we see now, as with growth and maturity of consciousness, because at some point in consciousness knows that it has transcended the group. And you're no longer identified as a group member with the level of consciousness. And you move outside but you have to venture beyond your relative boundaries in the cycle of your growth to become the soul that you become, because many souls, all souls incarnate for an odyssey. So souls incarnated at point A with the incarnation objective of traveling all the way to point Z, because they are Z. They're not A. I incarnated in Alabama. You told me, okay, you're a nigger, you're in Alabama, you're nothing, and you're not going to ever be anything, and don't ever expect to be anything, okay? That's the way it is. So that was the relative incarnation in the message. But now on the soul level, no, soul says, no, I thought you're Israelite, yeah? And your odyssey is going to take you here, and you'll go through impossible scenarios, and you end up with people who end up saying, I'll put a kai on you, and then somebody will take you, and they'll take you into a synagogue, and then they'll give you a kippah, and they'll tell you about the Shema, and the next thing, so your odyssey continues. You have an individual odyssey that's going to take you where you aren't taken. Now, there are 7 states of consciousness. I'm describing the 5th state of consciousness, quite frankly. Let me use some terminology that you can go and Google. There are the first 3 states of consciousness that we all have: a waking, dreaming, sleeping state of consciousness. And so what I've said is that that we have waking consciousness, we go to sleep and we dream. And in waking state of consciousness, we have one sense of reality. And in dreaming state of consciousness, we have another sense of reality. We might see ourselves flying or jumping over single buildings or doing things that are not really possible within the laws of nature, but we can see them in our dream. And then you have the 3rd state of consciousness, which is deep sleep. You don't know nothing. This is good. This is dead. This is why when you wake up as a Hebrew, you first thing Hashem, Modeyani Lifaneka Melikai, Vika Yom Sheki Zarta, Binisimati, Bihimela Rabbi Munateka. You thank Hashem for giving you life again, because if he didn't have to, many didn't wake up. So those are those first 3 states of consciousness. And then I told you about the mind settling down and experiencing, going beyond the self to experience transcendental consciousness, the unified field, pure being, pure consciousness. That's the 4th state of consciousness. And the meditation, self-reflection, is going from waking state of consciousness, your meditation, into your transcendental field, which is 4th state of consciousness. And over time, long in and out of that, what happens is that you integrate or stitch that pure being into your relative mind, relative thinking process, relative physiology. The experience of encountering pure consciousness transforms the physiology and the neurophysiology in such a way that one begins to live a dual reality, that is of inner silence coupled with outer activity, and that is the 5th state of consciousness. So waking, dreaming, sleeping state of consciousness, transcendental consciousness, doing meditation. When that experience is stabilized in activity, it's the fifth state of consciousness, becomes cosmic consciousness. And then as cosmic consciousness, it evolves into God consciousness. And God consciousness, as it evolves higher, even into unity consciousness. And that's the quest of the human potential. So this dual reality that we initiate after this is our first step toward higher states of consciousness, to living in a higher state of consciousness. What does it mean to live in a higher state of consciousness, Baba Yahshua? It means to experience this dual reality of awareness called cosmic consciousness. And in cosmic consciousness, as I told you, a deep silence experienced along with activity and yet separated from it. In cosmic consciousness, self-awareness exists as separate from activity. And that's where you can see this expression of inactivity, see inactivity. Because inactivity, you will be inactive. That will be your perception. And the growth of an ascendancy to cosmic consciousness fulfills the person's life, or fulfills an individual life in the relative world, in the relative field of diversity and change. Now, the individual status is transformed into cosmic life. Individual life transformed into cosmic life, where actions are no longer for personal gain. See, selfishness, egocentrism, me, all that is small self. All that is small self, but through meditation and prayer and discipline, the self is transformed and connects to its higher nature. And its higher nature now is no longer subjective, but universal, which is why we said cosmic consciousness is the beginning of life. And because the actions and needs of the individual are now the actions and needs and behavior of nature. And having reached the pinnacle of evolution, the actions of that individual produce a life-supporting effect in creation, and thus serving evolution. Everything is moving toward evolution. Hatred of others, killing of others, enslavement of others. The mystery stagnates and diminishes and serves to thwart the process of evolution. But when an individual has cultivated himself, cultivated herself, reach their highest potential, they transcend their egocentric makeup and become one with that organizing intelligence that is cosmic. A man or woman established in the all-time awareness of their cosmic nature has begun to live heaven on earth, because heaven is not a place that you go to when you die. Heaven is here right now. Experience, as Rabbi Nachman says, a state of consciousness, state of mind. And with continued development, cosmic consciousness develops into God consciousness. And God consciousness is a unique state where this dichotomy, that is this level where there was this dual functioning between the self and activity, it begins to function in an integrated manner. There was this sense of being separate from activity, and there was the activity. Now, you are the activity now, and the activity is God. In God consciousness, the sense of separation between the self and activity dissolves, and the duality that characterized cosmic consciousness is incorporated into the unity of God consciousness. See, this integration is on a physiological level. This integration is characterized by mental activity of super enhancement. You can do anything, you can know anything, but it's in a context. It's got to do with what God has for you to do. What God has for you to do, you will do. But it seems that it's just become superior. And that every aspect of super enhancement is applicable to every aspect of physiologic activity, including total brain, total intellect, optimizing of the senses, fully developed motions and heart. See, the activity of devotion, love, and reverence in God consciousness, man, involves into unity consciousness, which is the summit of human evolution. Human life is a process of continuous growth into higher, more harmonious states of consciousness. And I told you that there are 7. I want to reiterate it and name them again. There are 7 states of consciousness. The waking state, dreaming state, and sleep state. That's most people. They are unspiritual. They hear about spirituality. They go read about the prophets, but they themselves have no experience of the transcendental, or that what is called spiritual. They just go to sleep and wake up and dream. Then they start a spiritual practice. They embark upon the path of spirituality and have some experience of transcendence. That is, they transcend the relative and experience pure consciousness systematically, or sometime given a person's level of consciousness, people just slip into that. Great artists and great poets and holy mystics and people have this experience sometimes, but sometimes there's no way to automatically do it, systematically do it. And this is what we were searching for, a method. This is what the Vedic masters have given us, a Vedic technique by which we can do this every time. So waking, dreaming, sleeping, transcendental consciousness. Transcendental consciousness is the source of being, the source of the unified field, but cannot be lived in that field because of the body. So we have to come back, but we can integrate this into our neurophysiology state. And when we integrate this through repeated experience of taking our mind into that state of consciousness, then our neurophysiology becomes stabilized with that pure silence in all types of activity. It doesn't ever leave. And that's why you begin to identify with the silence as opposed to identifying with some superficial relative aspect of yourself. You say, I am that. I am that. Also, thou art that. And all of this is that. There's nothing else but that. On the fourth. Now, the fourth state of consciousness is transcendental, and the fifth. So when the fourth has been cultivated and cultivated sufficiently, and the nervous system has been cultured, then it becomes stabilized in activity, and it's called cosmic consciousness. God consciousness is the next level, which just occurs when through devotion and awareness of this reality, it continues to grow and it transforms into God consciousness, where like God is just all. And God is all, and the creation exists, but also through our perception, we begin to sense, even with our emotions and things, the subtlest level of all creation. Begin to see its creation, the inception of the absolute into the relative, which is that celestial point, and it's just beautiful. We see the reality keeps changing. So and that becomes unified consciousness. 7 states of consciousness: waking, dreaming, sleeping, state of consciousness, transcendental consciousness, cosmic consciousness, God consciousness, and unity consciousness. So this knowledge that I'm sharing with you is shared to inspire readers who read this article before at the site, those of you now who have the time to listen to it, to investigate the arena of consciousness and engage in appropriate evidence-based spiritual disciplines that will unfold your total potential. Because we no longer need to believe in someone else's champion, but we need to create your own self. This is the propitious moment where you now find the technology. You become self-governed. Hashem is going to give it to you. For those of us who are Ivrit, that's the beauty of reading the Torah in Ivrit. That's the beauty of seeking out somebody in the Yehudim to get a Siddur. That's the importance of going to a Jewish bookstore, getting a Jewish prayer book. That's why, to learn to pray and to read the language and to evolve and to become one with Hashem and to activate and to actualize the total potential. And what is the total potential of man? From the individual to cosmic, from me to what is your will for me. No longer, what do you want me to do? And it's no longer on that like that. It's like you're transformed, and you're transformed at the level of your being to become an agent of the universe. This cosmic consciousness is no longer for personal gain. It's to enhance the evolutionary status of humanity. So may we be blessed, and may you reflect on Ana Bakoach as a prayer. Ana Bakoach. Ana Bakoach gedoladim enka tatir setz ruach. Kabir v'nadam ka sagvenu ta'areinu nora. Nagibur doshe yachudi ka kababat shamrem. Barakim ta'arim rakami sitz tatika tamid gemlem. Hasen kadosh barov tuvka. Nahila de teka, Yahid Gehi, Leameka Pe, Zokore Kadushta Teka, Shavatenu Kabil, Ushma Sazakatenu, Yodea Taumot, Baruch Shem Kivod, Malhuto Le Olam Vahed, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kivod, Malhuto Le Olam Vahed, V'ahavta et Adonai Eloheka, B'kol Levaveka, Uvkal Nefsheka, Uvkal Muadeka. Oh, love Hashem with all your heart, with all your soul, all your resources. And when you do that, then you will love your neighbor as yourself. Baruch Hashem.